The courthouse clerk looked at me with tired eyes and quietly said that if I couldn't produce a legal spouse by tomorrow afternoon, everything my late grandfather had spent 60 years building would be handed over to someone who had never loved our family, never believed in our dreams, and had spent years waiting for us to fail. I walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight feeling as though the entire world had disappeared beneath my feet. Then, just when I thought there was no miracle left for someone like me, a woman I had never expected to see again stepped out of the crowd, looked directly into my eyes, and softly whispered, "If you truly need a wife by tomorrow, then you need to promise me these things first. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life." Until that afternoon, I believed my life was predictable. My name was Rowan Hale, and at 34 I managed Hale Orchard, a family-owned company that had grown from a tiny apple farm into one of the largest organic food suppliers in the state. People saw success when they looked at me, but they never noticed the empty house waiting for me every evening, the photographs of my parents that I still dusted every Sunday morning, or the quiet ache that followed me everywhere after losing the woman I once believed I would marry. My grandfather, Elias, had raised me after my parents died in a highway accident when I was 14. He taught me that character mattered more than wealth and that promises should never be made lightly. I remembered every word he had ever spoken, but there was one secret he had taken to his grave without ever mentioning it to me. His final will contained an impossible condition. Whoever inherited the controlling share of Hale Orchard had to be legally married before the inheritance could be finalized. My grandfather believed that leadership required stability and family, not loneliness. He had never expected to die so suddenly, and he had probably assumed I would already have built a life with someone. Instead, my engagement had ended 2 years earlier when my fiancée admitted she loved someone else more than she had ever loved me. Since then, I had buried myself in work and convinced myself that success could replace companionship. Standing outside the courthouse, I finally understood how wrong I had been. The woman standing before me was Ivy Mercer. 5 years earlier, Ivy had worked at our orchard during a difficult season after her father suffered a stroke. She had never asked for sympathy. She arrived before sunrise, worked harder than anyone else, and somehow still found reasons to smile. We became close friends, though neither of us admitted that our feelings had grown into something much deeper. Before either of us could say what our hearts already knew, she suddenly disappeared. I heard she had accepted a job several states away, and after months without hearing from her, I assumed I had simply never mattered enough for her to stay. Yet there she stood in a simple blue dress, carrying herself with the same quiet grace I remembered. Time had softened nothing about the kindness in her eyes. She listened carefully as I explained the impossible situation. She remained silent for several moments before saying that she could help me, but only if I promised her 3 things. The first was that our marriage, even if it began as an agreement, would always be built on honesty. No lies. No pretending outside what was absolutely necessary. The second was that if either of us wanted to walk away after everything settled, the other would let them go without anger. The third promise surprised me most. She asked me to spend 1 full day every month volunteering with families who had lost loved ones, because she believed people healed best when helping others heal too. They weren't demands about money or property. They were promises about becoming a better human being. Without hesitation, I agreed. The next afternoon, after paperwork, witnesses, and countless confused expressions from courthouse employees, Ivy Mercer became Ivy Hale. Everyone believed the hardest part was over. It had barely begun. News traveled through our town faster than summer wind. Employees whispered. Business partners questioned my judgment. My grandfather's longtime attorney privately warned me that several board members suspected the marriage was only for the inheritance and intended to challenge it in court. Meanwhile, my ambitious cousin Declan, who had expected to inherit the company himself, suddenly became unusually interested in every decision I made. His smiles grew warmer while his eyes became colder. At home, Ivy moved into the old farmhouse overlooking endless rows of apple trees. Everything felt awkward at first. Two people who had once nearly fallen in love were now married under circumstances neither had imagined. We shared breakfasts in quiet conversation, worked side by side during the afternoons, and slowly rediscovered the comfort we had once shared years before. One sunny Saturday, while repairing a broken fence together, I finally asked the question that had haunted me for years. Why had she disappeared without saying goodbye? Her expression changed instantly. She looked toward the orchard instead of at me and quietly admitted that someone had convinced her she wasn't welcome in my life anymore. My heart froze. She explained that shortly before leaving town, she had received anonymous letters claiming my family believed she was chasing my future inheritance. The letters included details only someone close to my family could have known. She also received a phone call warning that staying would destroy my reputation. Believing she was protecting me, she accepted a distant job and left before her feelings became impossible to hide. I had never written those letters. I had never even known they existed. For the first time, I realized someone had deliberately separated us. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Who had wanted Ivy gone? Why? And if someone had manipulated us once, were they still trying to destroy us now? Days later, another shock arrived. Our accountant discovered several financial irregularities inside Hale Orchard. Funds had quietly disappeared over the previous 4 years through complicated transactions that seemed almost invisible. Someone had been stealing from the company while allowing suspicion to fall elsewhere. Every trail eventually pointed toward someone inside our own family. Declan. When confronted, he denied everything and accused Ivy of influencing me against him. Several board members believed him. Others remained uncertain. The company my grandfather had sacrificed everything to build stood on the edge of collapse, not because of markets or weather, but because trust itself had been shattered. The investigation dragged on through bright autumn afternoons filled with tension. Lawyers came and went. Employees feared losing their jobs. Reporters gathered outside our gates. Every day seemed to bring another rumor. Then came the moment that changed everything. An elderly woman arrived unexpectedly at the orchard asking to see Ivy. Her name was Margaret Sloane. She had worked as my grandfather's personal secretary decades earlier. With trembling hands, she carried an old wooden box my grandfather had asked her to deliver only if our family ever faced betrayal from within. Inside were journals. Page after page described my grandfather's fears that greed might one day divide our family. Hidden among those journals was something even more astonishing. Copies of every anonymous letter Ivy had received. My grandfather had secretly investigated them before his death. Although he never gathered enough evidence to confront anyone, his notes repeatedly mentioned Declan's unusual behavior and unexplained access to family correspondence. The handwriting expert hired by our attorney confirmed what my grandfather had suspected years before. Declan had written every single letter. He had separated us because he believed a lonely Rowan would never marry, making the inheritance easier to challenge after Grandpa's passing. The truth spread quickly. Board members who had doubted me apologized. Criminal charges followed after financial investigators uncovered overwhelming evidence of embezzlement. But victory didn't feel like victory. I couldn't stop thinking about the 5 years Ivy and I had lost because of one man's selfishness. Those were years we could never recover. One afternoon, after the investigators finally left, I found Ivy sitting alone beneath the oldest apple tree on the property. Sunlight filtered gently through the branches while children from a nearby charity group laughed in the distance during one of the volunteer days she had encouraged me to begin. She admitted something I never expected. She said she had almost refused to marry me. Not because she didn't care. Because she had never stopped loving me. She feared that agreeing would eventually break both our hearts if the marriage remained only an arrangement. I realized then that my feelings had never disappeared either. They had simply been buried beneath grief, disappointment, and years of unanswered questions. For the first time since our wedding, I reached for her hand without obligation. There were no legal documents. No inheritance conditions. No witnesses. Only two people finally standing where life had always intended them to be. Months passed. The orchard recovered stronger than ever. Employees smiled again. Families returned for harvest festivals. The volunteer program Ivy had imagined expanded beyond anything we expected. Every month we welcomed grieving families, offering them peaceful afternoons among the trees, reminding them that healing often begins in places where life quietly continues growing. Then another surprise arrived. Margaret visited once more carrying one final envelope written in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. It had been addressed to me but sealed until after the inheritance dispute ended. Inside, Grandpa wrote that true wealth was never measured by land, buildings, or bank accounts. It was measured by the people willing to stand beside you when everything else disappeared. He admitted the marriage condition in his will had never been about controlling my future. He simply feared I would spend my life hiding behind work instead of opening my heart again after losing so much as a teenager. As I finished reading, tears blurred every word. He hadn't been trying to force me into marriage. He had been trying to remind me that no one should face life alone. A year later, on a beautiful spring afternoon filled with blooming apple blossoms, Ivy and I stood beneath that same old tree where we had finally confessed our feelings. This time there were no lawyers, no inheritance papers, no pressure from anyone. Only family. Friends. Employees who had become family. Children laughing through the orchard. I looked at my wife and quietly thanked her for those 3 promises she had asked me to make before agreeing to marry me. Honesty had saved our relationship. Freedom had allowed love to grow naturally instead of through obligation. Serving others had healed wounds neither of us realized we still carried. She smiled through tears and reminded me that promises only matter when people choose to keep them every single day. Years later, whenever visitors asked how 2 people could look at each other with so much peace after everything they had endured, we never spoke first about betrayal or courtrooms or inheritance battles. We spoke about forgiveness. Because holding on to anger would have allowed Declan to keep stealing from us long after the money was recovered. Forgiveness did not erase what happened. It simply refused to let pain write the rest of our story. Speech balloon special request: before the story ends, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in this situation? If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more meaningful and inspiring stories. Your support encourages us to keep creating stories that touch hearts around the world. Life has an extraordinary way of bringing the right people back when our hearts are finally ready to recognize them. Love built on honesty becomes stronger than deception, forgiveness breaks chains that revenge never can, and every genuine second chance carries the power to rewrite an entire future. Sometimes the greatest miracle isn't finding the perfect person at the perfect time, it is discovering that even after heartbreak, betrayal, and years of silence, kindness still has the courage to whisper, "Let's begin again."